the final deliverables for the empirical research proposal. So I'm going to go over the Project 4 guideline sheet, and you're welcome to open that document, go along with me, or simply refresh and review portions of this video as you need to. So first of all, the primary aspect that you are seeking to do, or your end goal, is to not only propose a service or initiative that is valid, but to show its viability. So an initiative that can help solve a campus problem. And we'll talk about making sure in the age of COVID that we emphasize how it might also save cost or time. All right, so ultimately, how do I judge this piece? I judge it as to whether or not your key stakeholder will find your proposal useful and even an encouraging launch for them to take on an initiative. And what I mean by encouraging is it doesn't feel like it's an extra burden, but it's meeting needs and it can be done. So that's the key point. All right, let's talk a little bit about the specifics. So we all know meeting notes will come in, we'll talk about that, but make sure those are very well kept, because that is my way of understanding who is playing in and who is not. Note that your working agreement comes into effect here too. I am looking for a decent mix of qualitative and quantitative data, meaning the quantitative data for this particular project is almost limited to the survey. We've talked about the fact that that will be limited, those of you that have been in the session discussions. So for many of us, we might have 40 or 50 surveys, and that might have to do. And we have to position what claims we can make. We can't say that represents all of Syracuse, but it's an indicator. And the way I would stress is it is a potential tool to use for further information. So you can encourage the stakeholder to reissue the survey with slight changes. All right, let's get down into this section, which, quite frankly, I had to clean up. I had a leftover piece from when this was a feasibility report, so I will hope that you will grant me a little bit of grace on that, but we will walk this through. And so it's not a big change, but I just want to make sure it's absolutely bullet clear. Usually the proposal itself is about 2,000 words. Okay, I say usually. Some people feel they can get it done in 1,500. But if you think about it, it's a single space, and a single space for a full page is about 500 words. So we're looking at about 4 pages. If it's, again, single spaced with hierarchy and maps and charts, usually a bit longer. Appendices are multiple pages. I said 10 pages before, but I really don't want you to feel like, wow, you have to have 10. You might have more. I have one person, they're working on a document that right now is about 20, 25 pages. Does that mean that that's an automatic A? No, it's not. It's what is necessary to make the point. All right, let's get down into the checklist, and then we'll get down to the deliverables. So we need to get into sections of the particular report, again, to just refresh, reboot. I'm going to hit this pretty quickly. Well, if I had it, let's go back up. So, I apologize for this, but I did want to at least reference it. Okay, we're getting in. I had it all set up, and then, of course, clicked off to find some other aspect and didn't realize it till now. So here's where we're at. Okay, we're now in the wheelhouse. So here are the proposals. So let's talk about the sections, recapping real quick. A cover page. We've gone over it. I will go over a sample in another short lecture. The tables of content page, please look at a template, download it. It'll make it a lot easier for you. Introduction, by the way, there are table of contents templates also for Google Docs. The introduction, again, is the who, what, where, when is what we're announcing. The who, what, where, when, why. Excuse me, the who, what, where, when. Who, what, where, and when, not the why. We're going to basically say those aspects, and then separate the why, if you will, emphasize it more, looking at the problem and making sure we flex that this is an opportunity for growth, for solution. We talked about those logics. Go back to the other particular lecture materials or talk to your peers who were present for that conversation. The method section, folks, is not the results. Please do not share what you found from your survey. Only share how you did your survey. What you're trying to do is, again, have them assess the soundness of your design, determine the limitations. Let's say you only had 40 survey results, you admit it, and you say, this is what it can do or can't do. And it allows, of course, the reader to say, okay, now I can replicate that, possibly, or work with it further. Please mention all kinds of your research. So there's primary and secondary research. The primary research are the surveys and interviews. The secondary is your comparative data from competing institutions. You may want to separate those into two subheads. You don't have to, but you can. The main thing in the method section is to show that it's soundly put together, and so there's a slight argument as to why you chose those and why they're legitimate. Again, limitations are important to mention, and sharing the actual facts of when the interview took place, where it took place, how long it was is important. The survey as to what dates it was conducted, that's important. And then if you want, now I should say, it should be slightly in this section as well, so I'll take that back. You should be arguing for some of the logics of the survey, the way you designed it. The results section can be combined with the discussion section, often because there's such brief results, meaning mostly the results are your comparative data institution work and what you found by looking at those websites and talking to stakeholders. So you could simply state large portions or points from those particular data sets, and you could separate those into subheads. So say, for example, interview 1, interview 2, interview 3. You could also then report major findings from the surveys in bullet form and separate that from then the discussion, or you could combine those two if you feel it will allow you to logically make a case much more easier. So that's up to you. That's typical for a proposal, meaning depending on the data set, depending on how you want to make the argument, you can combine or separate them. But whatever happens, I mean, let's just state exactly what needs to happen. Obviously, the results are just simply to report what happened. The discussion is to then interpret and analyze those results and make sure that you anchor all claims in data. All right, conclusion section is the overall proposal. Did you meet what you started out with? So you do want to almost restate your original target of the design and the proposal, the question you started, if you will, with your project, and whether or not the proposal is viable or not, or how it's been amended based on your findings. And then the recommendation is the how-to, and often the timeline of the specific actions that can be taken given the conclusion you have. This section will probably be bigger now for many of us because we'll also list the limitations and your encouragement of further research given that you hadn't been able possibly to get as many surveys. All right, so those are the sections, and the reasoning is that we don't have false assumptions or overgeneralizations. I would say most of us would have an anchoring table, but that is not absolutely requisite. An anchoring table means maybe of comparative institutional data as to how other programs are instituted elsewhere. And so you have, institution 1, 2, 3, and then you have the different aspects of how they do their programming. So for example, orientation programs, again, at University of Vermont, Paul Smith's, and another comparative institution. Hopefully these institutions are competitors with our institutions. And then you just simply list variables, the number of staff, whether it's a pre-orientation or actually orientation event, how long it is, whether it's a week or a few days, and the cost. It's very helpful, and I look at that and smile upon it greatly, even as I recognize that some of us won't be there or can't get there at this point. So the one graphic that will be there for all of us should be Microsoft Excel giving us the data in pie charts as to the results of the surveys. All right, guys, let's stretch this through. The rest of it is to make sure we're representing stakeholders ethically, making sure you're smart as to what you include. We talked about a stakeholder analysis chart, and that you have to make sure that when you deliver it to your actual key stakeholder, that you're not including your analysis of how to engage them. So making sure that is smartly attenuated to the person that you're actually delivering it to. In other words, you don't want to out your whole strategy for how you're trying to engage them or embarrass yourself by saying, well, here are the risks and benefits that we think that that person has. Because it's a sketch, right? It's not absolutely bulletproof. It's a rhetorical sketch for you to know how to engage. It also gives me a sense of how you're engaging those stakeholders. For me, again, that stakeholder analysis chart is very helpful to see the logics of how you engaged your stakeholders and whether you considered all the main stakeholders. All right, avoid reference to names of people surveyed. That's an important one, just to restate. Let's talk about citations. They can be, and often are, simply APA format, which would be the last name of the author, comma, and then the year. If it's an interview, you simply state that it is in the actual text and you do not need to cite it. Okay. Obviously, if it's an outside source, it would again be last name, comma, year of that publication. And you can find often that on web pages at the bottom of the page as to when it was last updated. All right, if you can't, you obviously have to leave it blank with just the last name of the author. If you don't have an author of that web page, which is often true, you simply use the title of the page. I'm going to highly encourage, as I did in notes with the class in person in our meetups on Monday, Tuesday, to use footnotes, endnotes. And when I go through an example, which I will post, and that example that we did on Monday, Tuesday, you'll see this. There will be no class presentation, obviously no materials. That shifted late. Sorry about not cleaning that out of the document earlier, but it was just too much work. We've already done a class presentation, so I feel like we still covered that learning outcome for the course. As to what is due, I will lecture a separate lecture on transmittal letters, but it's quite simple. It's just a letter that serves often as can be an email as well. But it's to your stakeholder primarily, and it will say thank you. It will say here, we'll refresh them as to what your proposal is. It will then lay out the major conclusion of the proposal. It will then also share who from your group might be a further contact, if indeed you want anyone from your group to be a further contact for them to follow up with. All right. The executive summary technically is the proposal itself, so this part should have been cleaned out here too. There are two different executive summaries, so we're very clear. An executive summary is formally defined as a very short precis before the actual introduction in typical reports, but it also is referred to as the whole document, a summary of the findings, if you will, the data that are in the appendix. So because of that confusion, I had cleaned it back out of the document and made the change. And now, again, find it buried in here nonetheless. But so basically the proposal itself, you can read it that way. Again, usually about 2,000 words, but if you can get it done with less, that's fine. All right, guys, the appendices, no page limit, typically around 10 pages. What do we want again? We do need the survey, but we need it slightly interpreted, at least for me. So I can understand why and how you made that design choice. You can do that in the method section, or you can do that in the appendices, the appendix itself, or do it in both places. The interview analysis. Oftentimes it's not just, you can drop the interview and the substance of it. You can include a screenshot with me to validate it even in the appendix, or you can include the screenshot as a separate attachment in the email with the submission of final materials, just to confirm the interview took place in some form. Obviously, if they're phone interviews, I have no way to absolutely confirm that. As to analysis, what does that mean? It means that sometimes you may want to, again, use the comments section to indicate how you interpreted certain phrases as to what was significant. All right, so that might be a play. All right, I would prefer stakeholder analysis. I strongly encouraged it, for at least me, for the deliverable for myself. Again, your key stakeholder, maybe not, and probably not. Cost analysis, if there are potential aspects you want to consider in terms of the price or the implementation over time. It's less important in a proposal. In a feasibility study, we did play that up more. We talked a lot about pressing a little stronger in this particular case because this project has shifted. Probably the greatest gift you can give them is a resources page. You can label it as such, or you can label it as an annotated bibliography. It's usually a paragraph, and we went over that quite extensively the other day, but briefly, the who, what, where, and why of that particular source. So again, that source would be probably from your source notes, but now tailored toward the key stakeholder. And that would mean that probably toward the tail end of that paragraph, or as a separate short paragraph, you would indicate how you think the stakeholder might be able to use that source or follow up on that source. All right. Other deliverables, if the working agreement can be a separate document in your folder, your Google folder. The meeting notes can be separate or included in the one particular document, either way. Proof of your survey results, a screenshot or otherwise from, if you're using whatever particular form, whether it's Google Survey, excuse me, or SurveyMonkey. All right, if there's an indication you work with anyone from the Writing Center, and if you're at ESF, the Public Speaking Lab, please go ahead and include that. And that is that. And folks, I will post other material soon. If you have questions, please do email me. As always, and take care.